Welcome to another year of We Are Here Too, a podcast about mental health and life abroad. For those who are new to the podcast in 2024, my name is Francesca. I'm an Italian counsellor and I'm based in Bonnie, Scotland. And for those who are coming back to the podcast, thank you very much for the support you've shown so far. I'm always amazed at all these downloads that you guys are doing to support the podcast, even during the months that I haven't published a single episode. And so this brings me to the first point of today's episode, which is about what has happened? Why was I offline for, I think now it's going to be 3 full months, and what is going to happen with the podcast, because I know that I promised that this entire season, at the end of season 2, was going to be about relationships, but things changed, and I would like to introduce you to what I have in mind now. The truth is, the structure of the podcast as it is now is not really working for me, and although I came here today to start something about relationships, I found myself really wanting to talk about what is current, and the structure as it is now is not going to offer it. But don't get me wrong, we're still going to talk about relationships. It's just that it's not going to be an entire season around that. And so without further ado, let's get started. Well, it's a bit daunting, start talking again to a microphone with no one in front of me after, I think it's been already 6 months. So I'm recording at the end of February. I'm not sure when I'm going to post this, but most likely it's going to be March, so not long to go. Today, I thought we could talk about identity. If you want and you're curious about it, you can go and check episode 3 from season 1 about, identity and identity loss. And I think that's a good place to start, or at least to have a sense of how this episode is connected in general to the sense of identity. But today I want to introduce something that may feel a bit controversial as a topic around identity. And I'm doing so because that's something that, came up to me when I started thinking about me as a migrant and someone who moved abroad, and, the difference in attitudes that I had when I first moved abroad to now. And guys, here we're talking about almost 20 years of life abroad in different places. So there is a lot there. And in between, I retrained as a counselor. And I had plenty of therapy as well. So a lot of things shifted, and the understanding that I have of myself now, the things that I did back then, completely changed. So bear with me. Actually, I was also thinking that maybe this is a very good point where to start. The sense that I made back then, so when I was, first time I was 20, when I moved out. So the sense that I made of my needs of moving out and my identity and what was happening when I was that young, and I was going for an Erasmus program. So it was for me, that was a very sheltered experience of life abroad. I thought oh, that's great. I can't wait to move out of my family home. I can't wait to meet new people. I can't wait to speak English all the time. I can't wait to experience something new. I was incredibly excited, and I loved the idea. And then for sure, during that time, a lot of things happened. But the excitement of being away from family home to a new country. And by the way, guys, that was Wales. It was in Cardiff. So not sure if any of you live there. I love that place. I loved Wales. I loved being an Erasmus student. So you can imagine, right? How can I even describe that experience? That was just amazing to me from so many different angles. And then I think that was the first time where I felt like I needed to integrate differently. Most of my flatmates were from the UK, mainly from England, and a couple were from abroad. And I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to be part of them. And that's the first time that I felt the pull of like integration and adaptation, which nowadays I can call that way. Back then, I couldn't. And I really wanted to give it all of myself. I was just like, just experience, just take me in. I just want it all. And although I was still like meeting and hanging around with a couple of Italian friends, and I then eventually met other Italian people, you know, my flatmates were pretty central to me and my experience there. And that meant that there were certain things that I needed to do a bit differently than the ones that I was doing as very much Italian, thinking I was still in Italy, right? Because that was the problem. I was still thinking that I was in Italy, and you know, however I was behaving was, you know, was accepted and welcomed when actually it wasn't. And although I didn't make any sense of it back then, because I loved that experience so much, when I went to my other experience abroad, I think that was a couple of years later, a few years later actually, and I ended up living in Cyprus. I actually faced quite heavily against, you know, the idea that the way that I was behaving was not okay, you know. And guys, I'm not talking about anything like incredibly, you know, wrong. I was not doing anything wrong. You know, maybe there was a way that I was talking which was very animated. Okay, like it was basically, I was basically sweating emotions, okay, if you want something very graphic. I was moving my hands quite a lot, like, you know, I was gesticulating heavily, you know, I was very loud in the way that I was talking, like my volume was quite loud. And, you know, I was talking. I am a storyteller. And maybe that's the reason why I have a podcast now. But, you know, that was clearly something that did not agree with the people that I was meeting, or their characters, or, you know, culturally, what they were used to. You know, but at the time I was so young, or I was seeing myself as such a young, you know, person, and had no understanding of the world around me, and the fact that maybe some of the things that I was absorbing were not necessarily belonging to me. They were belonging to this other person and these other people. Like, you know, for example, like gesticulating that heavily, fine. You know what I mean? Like, that's the way that I express myself. And, you know, nowadays I'm wondering what all of those years of like reducing my gesticulation and, you know, moderating my tone of voice and moderating my storytelling, I don't know, skills and nuances and whatever it is that I bring to life when I tell a story. I'm thinking about like, you know, what are the consequences of that? And also, like, at the time, I did not know that I could be me in another country. You know, at the time I simply thought, okay, like, you don't like me, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna change. I'm gonna try not to move my hands that much. I'm gonna try not to, you know, be too loud when I speak. And I don't know, I don't know what else I was doing that was not accepted. But you know what I mean? Like, I was so young and I had no much sense of who I was as a person. The idea or the need to be loved, you know, and to be accepted was so high in me that I was not really understanding all of these other, you know, nuances and what it meant to really adapt. And then the question was like, am I adapting to the environment, or am I adapting to the people around me? You know, am I adapting to the new culture, or am I adapting to the idea that the people around me have about me adapting? You know what I mean? It's a bit complicated thinking, but that's where I was at. And I think this is the problem, right? Like, I wanted people to like me, and that was so heightened in me, not only because of the person that I was at the time, you know, that I had that sense of like, I need to people please, but it was also because I had no one else around me. I had no support network. I had no emotional support network around me, no friends, no family. Everything was new. I didn't know my surroundings very well. I hadn't connected to the environment yet. There was so much novelty that although that was incredibly excited for me, was still unsettling. And whether I wanted to admit that or not at the time, that was like the main reason that actually pushed me to see these other people's words and behaviors as if like they were like, everything, and they were like the word. Like, you're telling me the truth and I just have to follow. My gesturing, my gesticulating is too much. Okay, I'm gonna tone it down. And that's it. That's how like an identity, a personality changes. For me was the need to be liked. But also, I was given a new opportunity here. And although the opportunity came quite forcefully with Francesca, don't do this. Francesca, people don't like that. Francesca, this is rude. Francesca, we don't like it. Which was horrible, okay? It was a very horrible experience. But I was given an amazing opportunity, which is something that I didn't know I wanted, which was the one of like, I just want to leave all the suffering behind. And the more I was integrating English, and the more I was integrating like the new cultures, habits into my own, the more I was creating space in my head. I could think more clearly. I would be able to be able to feel relaxed. It's something that I don't remember feeling much when I was much younger. I got all of these opportunities that I was like, hey, I love this. And, but without knowing that actually I was trying not to process something, and that there was so much resentment about my country at the same time. And then I started counseling training, and it completely moved upside down everything that I knew about myself and how I was making sense of the world. Because yes, counseling does that. And at the time I was doing my training, I was also receiving counseling, and those were pretty hard years, if I may say. And I'm not sure if there are other counselors or psychotherapists out there listening to this. So you guys, you know what I'm talking about. But it was so interesting, although pretty brutal at times. It was so interesting for me to be faced against one of the things that I really tried hard to hide and put in a box, in a corner, or basically not even in a corner. It was like far away from where I was, so I would never have to see it again. And that was really my relationship with my home country. Consider that by the time I started my counseling training, it had been already a good, I would say, 10 years of me, living abroad and having an identity that was like a bit of a mix of like, I'm Italian, but I'm not so Italian. I'm from somewhere else, but not really from somewhere else. And I can create an entire podcast episode on this, but that's not the point. But you just think about this, right? Like, over 10 years of like being away from my country and not feeling like I really wanted my country being part of my identity. I go on the training, I'm asked questions about whether I would plan to go back to my home country for a living, whether I was going to counsel Italian clients in Italian. I was asked many different other questions that were on the surface unrelated but very relatable to this idea of like identity, who I am, what am I not trying to see or connect to. And then it clicked. It really clicked. Once someone mentioned something about their needs of separating what it used to be to what was now, And I realized basically that's what I was doing. I was running away from Italianness, whether Italianness is a word, but I was running away from what I used to be, what was still part of me in a way. And I was doing all my best to suppress it. And I was suppressing it by doing everything in English language. I was doing my best by not connecting to other Italians in Glasgow, where I studied. I try my best doing that by not engaging with any other foreigners and only trying and hang around with locals. I did my best by making sure that I would not engage anymore as much with Italian food. Although that was a bit of a survival thing, I personally think there is a lot that can be gained by connecting to the local produce and cooking local recipes, that exists for a reason. So let's lean into that. And there's another podcast episode for you guys that I'm planning to make in the future. But that said, I really I used to eat pasta every day, guys, very stereotypical Italian, although I don't think all the Italians eat pasta every day. That's part of the stereotype that maybe it's not necessarily true, but I used to, and I stopped, because I was like, why? And also I was not only doing all of these things, but I was also accusing others of not trying enough. I was mad at them. I would actually trash them with other friends of mine who were on the same wavelength as me. I mean, it was really horrible behavior, okay? I'm not condoning that at all, but that, I couldn't even see how wrong that was. First of all, for trashing other people's attempts to survive life abroad, but also I could not understand that actually that was my coping strategy. My coping strategy to make sure that I could survive, that I could be okay. Because life for me before wasn't all of that amazing, beautiful thing, although I still have many enjoyable memories about my home country. But at the time, I was in so much suffering that I really, really wanted to close a chapter there. And I was succeeding. By the time I finished my counseling training, I think I succeeded. There was nothing Italian left in my life, which doesn't mean that I don't have an accent. But see, even the accent, guys, I try my best to get rid of it. In so many ways, I have managers telling me that actually my way of talking was too firm. It was coming a bit mechanical, which fair enough, English is not my first language, and the way that I'm speaking now is not the way that I was speaking when I first moved to the country. But even some directiveness and firmness that comes maybe in a way that, someone from a Mediterranean country uses. I changed that. I tried, it's not necessarily that I changed that. I changed it at the beginning, and now I'm just no, wait a second. I want that back. All my assertiveness, and these can overlap other topics about, other things. Another episode. Bear with me, guys. Otherwise, I open other parentheses and we are already almost hitting the 20-minute mark with this episode. But there are so many things that, they were happening. The accent I was saying, as if it's not okay to show people that I'm a foreigner, as if it's not okay to show people how proud I am of my language, how much heritage, and love there is in my mother tongue. And there is this beautiful poem, and I really hope one day that I could interview the author of this beautiful poem that talks about mother tongues. But that's for another time again. But you know what I mean? And now I'm just now I have the accent that I have, and, I'm not going to change it again. But for sure, I'm not going to make an extra effort not to sound Italian. Okay, and sometimes I do. Not now, but sometimes I do. I sound more Italian than others. So, we are coming to an end of today's episodes, and I have a couple of questions for you based on what I've shared today. First one being, if you're someone who's loving the new country so much, maybe because of opportunities and what it's happening, maybe you're less discriminated, you get like a better work-life balance. There may be so many reasons why we love the new life, and there may be so many reasons why we hate. And I'm not using this word lightly, right? Okay, hate. But maybe there's so many reasons why we hate our home country. So for me, it's important here to ask, where is the pain? What is it that is asking you not to connect to what your origins are? What can you do to tend to that, like with tenderness? There is so much power in healing old wounds. There is so much lightness in letting go. We don't have to hold on to the pain, because when we put things and we push them on a side and we try not to see them and we try to screen them out, actually the pain is still there. It is still unprocessed in a corner. It is threatening. It threatens to come up again. It comes up maybe when we're asked about our home country. It comes up maybe when it's time to organize holidays and people in the home country, they're asking you when you're coming back. It comes up when we meet another person from our own country and we try to ignore them or to avoid them, or we just label them like, another XYZ nationality, the bother of meeting with them, right? The other question is, how do you make space for all the tension that comes from having this like foreign identity? Because the reality being, we're not the person we used to be in our home country. And for sure, we're not like, someone from, the country that is hosting us. We are somewhere in between. And there is tension, right? Like there has to be, we're bound to leave that tension because we are the living proof of a cultural clash. Okay? So how can we create space for that? So rather than like swallowing us, it actually uplifts us and it makes us like much better people for ourselves, for the people in our life. We can extend it to others, to the world, to the other living being, to the environment. What do we need to embrace it and soften it? And with that said, the episode is coming to an end. Thank you very much for staying, and I'm looking forward to having you here again on We Are Here Too, a podcast about mental health and life abroad. See you next time. Bye.